All right, the Prime Minister has warned Australians not to get complacent, revealing any relaxation of restrictions are still many weeks away. Robust debate also continues around whether restrictions should be lifted as the nation continues to make good progress on flattening the curve. And the Treasury releases modelling forecasting a 10% hike in unemployment. Join me now for her analysis is Sky News host and News Corp columnist Peta Credlin. Peter, look, there are some green shoots in these figures, and I think a lot of people are getting excited at that and the prospect of some of these restrictions being relaxed. But the Prime Minister and the Treasurer and the Health Minister and the state premiers and territory leaders are sort of suggesting that we hasten slowly on this. For our viewers at home, when do you think the government will start to think seriously about easing some of these restrictions?
Well, I know they're having a conversation about it on Thursday, Gleeson, when they have this meeting of the National Cabinet again. I think they will hasten slowly. I think the numbers today of a 10% unemployment rate are bad. They're terrible. Anytime it gets out of single figures at all, it's terrible. But they're better than they had thought. I think before the JobKeeper program, they were predicting somewhere around 15%. I actually think it would have been higher, to be fair. But there's been an inordinate amount of money spent to get us to the position of 10% unemployment. You know, over $300 billion. You know, Labor left $96 billion of debt. Took John Howard 10 years to pay that off. Now here's $300 billion in a matter of weeks. I think it's going to be tough. I was listening to an economist from the National Australia Bank saying that he thinks Australia is going to have its worst ever recession in history. It's going to be much deeper than people understand and much darker because our economy is so different. We are not a manufacturing nation anymore. We don't have cheap energy anymore. We are digging things out of the ground and we're growing things and sending them to Asia. But a lot of the value add that we've had perhaps in the past when we've hit sort of economic skids is not there, and we're very heavily indebted and reliant on the housing market. So I think that the government will be thinking about all those things, but they're not going to want to risk what's happened in Singapore when they were perceived to have done so well, Gleeson, and then they've had this sort of second round infection.
Peter, you mentioned, you know, the cost of making sure that we try to get this through this. You know, the Prime Minister keeps referring to it as a bridge. And I know it's probably a little bit premature to start talking about exactly how we're going to pay for it. But there was a suggestion floated at the weekend that the GST may go up, that they may even look at some sort of special deficit levy as they did back in the Abbott days.
Well, the deficit levy is still on.
Is it? Right, there you go.
Yeah, the deficit levy was due to come off, and they'll probably just roll these things over, and they certainly, I think, will push out that upper band of tax cuts. You're going to ask me, do I think the GST should go up?
Sure.
I think the GST has got to be looked at. It is by far the fairest and most efficient tax. That's in technical terms. That's what the tax boffins like to say, in that it applies with its few exceptions right across the board, and it's it depends how much you spend, depends how much you pay. It's very fair. The problem is when it was brought in back in after the '98 election. I was working in federal politics at the time. There were all these promises from the various states that this would go and that would go, and some of the sales tax, luxury sales tax hikes. Most of those states kept all of those taxes on and added more. So if there was a move to increase the GST, and of course it's collected by the Commonwealth, not a dollar stays in Canberra, every cent of it goes out to the states, then there would have to be, before they got the money, an agreement by the states to get rid of a whole lot of inefficient taxes like payroll tax. I mean, payroll tax is a tax against you hiring people. How is that a good thing? These taxes need to go. Land taxes, I think, are inefficient as well. They all should go. If they want an increase in the GST, then all these nuisance taxes, wrong-headed taxes, grab taxes, money grab taxes need to go.
You mentioned that the National Cabinet are getting together again on Thursday. There's also speculation that it's a better model than COAG. Now, you've been at plenty of COAG meetings. We even had the unprecedented situation on Sunday, Peter, of the Premier of Queensland, Anastasia Palaszczuk, coming out and saying that Scott Morrison was doing an outstanding job in trying to sort of, you know, do the right thing by this coronavirus. What are your thoughts on this national cabinet? Do you think it could finish up being a permanent part of our political landscape?
Well, it's essentially the same people around this table that sit around the COAG table. So what makes it different? Well, what's different here is it has a very clear focus. There's just single agenda items on coronavirus. There's the absence of bureaucrats in the room. There's the absence of great torturous papers that run 40, 50 pages long and subcommittees and all that feeding in process before you even get into the room. So it's a very efficient room, it makes decisions, and they're all sitting around the table, and all that Scott Morrison and his tribe are doing is writing big, big cheques that the states will all get a go of. You know, as I said, $300 odd billion, what isn't there to like? You know, and it's no wonder that Anastasia Palaszczuk is complimentary. Anything that the punters in Queensland don't like, she blames on Scott Morrison. Anything that he might have done well, she claims credit. And she knows going into an October election that she's got to get centre-right conservative Queenslanders to vote with her in order to survive. So she's going to cuddle up to Scott Morrison like Peter Beattie and others used to cuddle up to John Howard. So you know, we'll see a bit more of that from Anastasia Palaszczuk.
There was talk today, Peter, that some of these draconian or so-called draconian fines that were imposed over the Easter weekend, the poor bloke that went on the Tinder date and got fined $1,300, hopefully had a little bit more luck with the Tinder date. But there's suggestions today they may not actually stand up in court. Do you think the police went a little bit over the top over the weekend?
Look, it depends what it is. I think it is over the top to find the mum in Victoria who was giving her kid a L-plate lesson. I mean, if there's any time to learn to drive, it'd be now. There's not many cars on the road and the poor kids can't go to school and they're missing out on all the usual things that a kid in year 12 might get to do in that wonderful end of year, you know, transition. So I'm a bit sympathetic. The bloke with the Tinder date, I mean, seriously, you reckon going from Cairns all the way to Port Douglas and thinking that, well, wherever it was, but it was in the car and he went a fair way for it, you think that he thought he was inside the rules? Of course he didn't. He knew he was doing something wrong. I'd throw the book at him. I mean, we have this whole debate about could you visit your partner if you're not living with them? And I know what the authorities were trying to do. They were trying to stop people getting on Tinder or doing all the stuff they do online and meeting for a hookup and then trying to claim as they're knocking on the door, but this is my boyfriend's house or this is my girlfriend's house. So I'm a bit sympathetic with the police here. They're trying to do the right thing. Most Australians are doing the right thing. Look at that curve. I mean, it's been a fantastic effort by Australia in the last few weeks. And I think we need a bit of credit there. And I'm happy that the people that do the wrong thing are getting slapped with the fines.
All right. Pell, your thoughts on the High Court decision, and of course he came out when this happened and said he was hopeful that this particular acquittal wasn't a referendum on the Catholic Church. How do you see this playing out? Police now looking at him again.
Well, they're going to have to in Victoria in the sense that a lot of people involved in the Get Pell campaign, and that's what the evidence in a Royal Commission in Victoria discussed it as, a Get Pell campaign inside Victoria Police. They've got to now prove themselves right when the High Court last week said that they were wrong. 7-0 that they were wrong. There's a guy in the running who has interviewed Pell in relation to the recent charges and the matter that's now been thrown out by the High Court. This bloke's in the running to be the Chief Commissioner of Police in Victoria when the incumbent shortly retires. So there's a lot of police in Victoria, or certainly the hierarchy of police are very invested in making sure that if George Pell has been exonerated on these charges, that more will suddenly emerge and be dealt with. I fear for the Cardinal in that this may never go away, that he may be a victim himself of a whole lot of people for good reasons and bad reasons who want to see the Catholic Church in some way take more responsibility for these crimes. And I say this, mate, as a Victorian. George Powell was the first Archbishop in the world to establish a process that dealt with these crimes and paid compensation to victims rather than just moving bad priests around and covering it up. Now, people can argue whether the model was strong enough, whether there was enough money paid, but he was the first archbishop in the world to do it, and I think he deserves a bit of credit. And I wish, you know, as he retires, I suppose, here from public life, that he himself gets some peace.
Peta Credlin, thanks for joining us tonight on Sky News Across Australia. Always a pleasure.
You're welcome.